Network. In Washington, I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.
More than a century ago, a company called Calum helped Jacksonville become the winter film capital of the world, a reputation that lasted only a decade. Hear the fascinating true story on Bygone Jacks, Our Unsung History, a podcast from WJCT Public Media.
Quilt Fest Jacksonville, themed Sew Your Heart Out in its 37th year, showcases 400 quilts artfully sewn to be visually stunning and beyond tradition. September 19th through 21st at the Prime Osborne Center. Tickets at quiltfestjacks.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, TikTok on trial. As the social media giant heads to court for a key hearing on its future, we discuss how social media regulation could impact users and First Amendment law. Then, we talk to the author of a compelling new crime novel told in verse from 5 different perspectives. And hard lessons learned from the Jags' first home game against the Cleveland Browns. Join the conversation. You can reach us on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email questions or comments to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. Florida authorities are holding a suspect wanted in yesterday's apparent assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. Florida prosecutors say they're preparing a warrant. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports the incident happened at Trump's Florida golf course.
The apparent attempted assassination comes just 2 months after Trump survived another attempt on his life. Secret Service opened fire on the suspected gunman when they noticed the muzzle of a rifle poking through some shrubbery that lines the course. The Republican nominee, Donald Trump, was about 400 yards away. President Biden said in a statement that there is no place for political violence in the country.
NPR's Franco Ordonez reporting. Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance is standing by his falsehoods that Haitian migrants were eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. The lie has been rejected as, quote, garbage by Ohio Republican Governor Mike DeWine. Municipal buildings and public schools have been closed because of threats. Today, 2 colleges in Springfield have moved all classes online because of bombing and shooting threats. NPR's Luke Garrett reports.
The Republican candidate for vice president defended his words about Haitian migrants.
The evidence is the first-hand account of my constituents who are telling me that this happened.
Springfield officials say there is no evidence of Haitian residents eating pets. When asked about this by CNN's Dana Bash, Vance said,
if I have to
meme,
create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do, Dana.
Vance says the town has been overwhelmed by migrants. But since Vance and Trump made these false claims and spread them on social media, local officials say it has also received numerous bomb threats. Luke Garrett, NPR News.
The Justice Department and the video sharing app TikTok will be in federal court today. They're arguing over a law that could effectively ban the app in the U.S. by January. NPR's Bobby Allen reports.
It's seen as perhaps TikTok's last hope, convincing a federal appeals court that banning the app used by as many as half of Americans is a free speech violation. The Justice Department will be defending the law Congress overwhelmingly passed that considers China-owned TikTok to be a national security threat. The law gives TikTok's parent company until January 19th to sell or be put out of business in America. TikTok says forcing it to divest from Beijing-based ByteDance is unconstitutional and technologically not feasible. Justice Department lawyers have asked for a ruling by December. Whatever is decided, the matter could be appealed to the Supreme Court. Bobby Allen, NPR News.
It's raining pretty hard on parts of the North and South Carolina coasts this morning. There are tropical storm warnings up for the region. It's being pelted by a tropical system that the National Hurricane Center says does not yet have all the characteristics of a tropical storm. That could happen later today. This is NPR.
It's now 4 minutes after 9. Good morning. This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Employees are returning to work today after AT&T announced it reached a tentative agreement with the Communications Workers of America in District 3 in the Southeast, bringing the work stoppage to an end this morning. The Southeast contract covers about 15,000 employees in technician, call center, machine operator, and other customer service roles across 9 states. As a federal appeals court considers Florida's ban on transgender therapy, some healthcare providers are working to provide treatment to patients. A federal appeal court last month issued a stay on a federal judge's June decision to block Florida's ban on gender dysphoria treatments for minors. In anticipation of that, Spectrum Health, one of the largest transgender clinics in the state, prescribed medication to patients that should last a few months. Joey Knoll is the founder of Spectrum. He says the clinic also hired a physician to keep treating its adult patients.
The difficulty with new patients that want to come into the practice, but we do have a process as well for those individuals to be able to get started on their hormones.
The stay will remain in place as a federal appeals court considers a June ruling on the ban, in which a lower court ruled the ban was discrimination against transgender individuals. It's 72 degrees in Jacksonville, 30% chance of rain today with temperatures near 82 degrees.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include EBSCO, committed to making it easy for people to discover and access library resources anytime from anywhere with Bibliograph and linked data technology. Learn more at ebsco.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, First Amendment law meets national security concerns in federal court. We talk about the case this morning against TikTok and the broader effort by some lawmakers to regulate social media. Later in the program, a local crime novelist tells the story of a missing teenage girl through verse and 5 distinct voices. But first, TikTok on trial. As the social media giant heads to court for a key hearing today, we preview a community discussion on the future of social media regulation. To discuss that, we're joined by the moderator of tonight's event, Dr. Nick Seabrook. He's a professor of political science and public administration at the University of North Florida. Hey, Nick.
Good morning.
We're also joined by Julie Shee. She's an assistant professor of public administration at the school and also a part of tonight's discussion. Welcome, Julie.
Good morning.
So we were actually supposed to be joined by Cord Byrd, Florida Secretary of State. He wasn't able to be here. But Nick, remind us what is happening in federal court today.
So today we will hear oral argument before the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals in TikTok's challenge to the kind of divest or ban legislation that passed out of D.C. earlier this year. And TikTok is arguing that this bill is illegal in a variety of different ways, but primarily that it violates the First Amendment, that it infringes upon free speech, both the free speech rights of TikTok itself as a corporation, its ability to speak to users through its platform, and its ability to engage in expression through its curation of content that appears on the site, but also that it violates the free speech rights of its users as well by denying them access to content and information on the platform. On the other side, the government has argued that TikTok poses a major national security risk that justifies those infringements on speech.
So the hearing today is before a 3-judge panel in the U.S. Court of Appeals in D.C. This law would go into effect on January 19th unless the court rules otherwise, and it stands to impact a huge amount of people who use it, Nick.
Yeah, so according to TikTok's filings in the case, they have somewhere around 170 million US users of the platform, which is getting fairly close to about half of the US population. Other estimates put it in the 150 million range, but either way, we're talking about a substantial chunk of Americans who use the TikTok service. And the data also shows that it's particularly popular among younger Americans. And about a third of younger Americans get the majority of their news from TikTok. So if this lawsuit ends up with the court siding with the federal government, we could be looking at a TikTok ban in the United States beginning early next year.
And Julie, they've asked for a decision to be made in January to allow either side to appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court and to provide that time if needed. But as Nick says, this could take effect as soon as January 19th if the court allows it to move forward.
Yeah.
And so this is an issue, as he said, over concerns that this app could be used to spy or influence. And to be fair, I think every app is trying to do that to some extent, right? They're collecting our data. They're trying to influence or manipulate our decisions and how we choose things or how we shop. But the stakes are higher here. This is a case that's supported by the FBI, by the FCC, and the Department of Justice calls it a national security threat of immense depth and scale. So what's at stake here?
So I think TikTok is different than other like popular social media platforms here is that it is a app owned by the Chinese technology companies for 99%. The ownership, which is also have 1% of the ownership by the Chinese government or the Communist Party. So I think that is the biggest concern being raised up by the government here for the national security issue, because sure, all other social media platforms can access to our individual data and can be a threat to the safety. But at least it's within this country that government can, fairly easier to monitor or control. But when is another nation is involved, I think it's fair to raise that security concern.
And to your point, I mean, foreign powers are not allowed to own mainstream news outlets. So Rupert Murdoch, he had to become a U.S. citizen before he could kind of take over the Fox News empire and other broadcast and publication interests. And so is there a need to update our definition of media? I mean, clearly, when you talk about nearly half the population, having this app, using this app and accessing it, it is a source of information. It is a form of media.
It is. Social media is a type of media by definition. It's different than the traditional media because, usually the traditional media is more like a one-way information delivery, but social media is very different because it's a two-way communication. So the users themselves can also be the content generators. They can also influence other people, which is compared to the traditional media, it is, the editor, in people in the industry actually control the content, generate the content. So that's the difference between social media and media, which is now because of the appearing of social media, that's changing the entire society consume information. And
we know that it's incredibly influential, Nick. One of the concerns that's been expressed by the Department of Justice in this case is, what could happen that would allow this company to sway the political views of Americans. One thing that's come up, obviously we're in an adversarial position with China. There's been concerns if China were to invade Taiwan or in the event of a war between China and the United States. If you have an outlet that is this influential and owned essentially by the Chinese government, that it could be a powerful tool to spread misinformation or to sway people's views.
Yeah, and so we know in kind of broad general terms what the national security concerns that the U.S. government has here. The possibility that the app could be used to spy on American citizens, that the Chinese Communist Party could access data on U.S. users and use that for nefarious purposes. There's also the issue of misinformation as well. There have been a number of allegations that the TikTok content algorithm manipulates information, manipulates the feeds of users to push them towards particular positions, whether it's taking an anti-Israel position in the recent conflict with Hamas, or suppressing information that's damaging or embarrassing to the Chinese government. But we don't know a lot about the specific national security threats that the government is citing in this lawsuit, because the vast majority of that information has been redacted in the legal filings. The U.S. has claimed that it would be damaging and dangerous to national security to reveal information on those threats publicly. And so outside of the Justice Department, the only individuals who actually know the full scope of the government's case are the 3 judges who will be issuing the decision.
And ByteDance, which owns TikTok, has asked for those redactions to be removed and that information to be released. But as you say, the government's opposed it. We're talking about social media, specifically TikTok right now, which is in court today. The future of it at stake very much. And you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can email comments or questions about social media or this case to firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's interesting, Nick, when you talk about, the influence that this app could have, or the way that it could possibly track or interfere with its own users. And the interesting thing is that there have been some examples of this happening. There was a reporter for BuzzFeed who was reporting on China. Emily Baker White, she works for Forbes now, but she had been tracked by ByteDance, not so much for her personal information, but because she was meeting with people that were maybe employees of ByteDance, or they suspected as much, and they were trying to triangulate where she was located, where they were located at the same time. And that's information that's been reported on. They were accessing their IP addresses and their user data, and using covert surveillance through this app. So it's not something that's abstract or possible. It's actually happened.
Yeah, and ByteDance at least claims that it has taken steps over the last few years to address some of these concerns. People may recall that this is not the first time that we've had this whole debate. Back in the summer of 2020, the Trump administration attempted to achieve something very similar, kind of this divest or ban ultimatum, through an executive order. And that was ultimately put on hold by the courts, and it was rescinded by Joe Biden once he took office in 2021. But after that happened, the Justice Department and the federal government continued negotiating with ByteDance. There were discussions with U.S. companies like Microsoft and Oracle about potential deals to sell the company. And TikTok did invest about $2 billion to move a lot of its data on US-based users to servers controlled by Oracle, the parent company of Google, to provide for greater oversight by auditors, to kind of silo that data away from the broader Chinese company. I think what we saw happen earlier this year suggests that lawmakers in Congress are very skeptical that they've actually followed through on what they've promised. And certainly neither the White House nor Congress was kind of buying the idea that this effort has adequately addressed those concerns that have been raised going all the way back to 2020.
And you kind of alluded to some negative impressions of Israel that were, believed to be spreading on TikTok, and also very pro-Palestinian hashtags that were trending. And we know that that was some information that the Congress may have been briefed on when they made this decision, concerns that this app was already being used to shape public opinion about that conflict.
Yeah, and this has been, I think, a common theme in a lot of these misinformation campaigns by foreign adversaries, that the way they go about influencing American public opinion is by promoting division, trying to pit Americans against one another and destabilize things. We saw this with the Russian interference back in the 2016 election. And we're seeing something similar now, I think, with TikTok, that to the extent that that algorithm is being potentially manipulated by the company, perhaps at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party, it's to sow division and to pit Americans against one another. And it focuses on these types of divisive issues like the conflict in Gaza.
And Julie, the company ByteDance has said, there's no indication that they've been pressured by the Chinese government, that they would not intend to turn over any information. But the concern there is ultimately if they were forced to by the Chinese government, they really wouldn't have any choice.
No, they don't. So all the technology companies in China has to follow, the Chinese government rule or law. They passed it in 2017, saying that if the Chinese government require a technology companies to, submit all individual data for security reasons or for whatever the reason the government claim, the company really have to, giving all the data to the Chinese government. But I think the law default was designed for all the citizens in China. They were not really targeting on foreign citizen primarily by designing that law. Also that China has a very different law system than United States. We don't have constitution same as here. So it is hard for a lot of technology companies to adjust their positions when they are, especially, for example, TikToks are now trying to working in two different law systems. So I think that's the struggle that the technology companies are facing.
We're talking about social media and TikTok and the influence or implications social media could have on national security. We've got a message from Ed on Facebook. He says, according to Chinese law, it's illegal for any business not to fully cooperate with the government if they're asked to do so. Serious consequences if the business refused. You can reach us online if you want. It's 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We've got a call from Susan. Good morning. Susan in Mandarin, go ahead.
Thank you. I was wondering if your guest could tell me what the difference is between Twitter and TikTok and how we can be sure Twitter isn't doing some of the things that he's accusing TikTok of doing. And also in relation to that, I was concerned about DeSantis sending law enforcement officers to people's homes who signed a petition, because that seems related, kind of troubling.
Interesting. Thanks, Susan. To her first point, why are we picking on TikTok here, Nick?
Well, I think there's a fair point to be made, and Julie kind of touched on this earlier, that what TikTok is doing with US-based users' data, what TikTok is doing with its algorithm, with its manipulation of the things that people see in their feed, it's not all that different from what Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or any of these social media companies and platforms that are US-based and US-owned are doing. I think the reason why TikTok has been singled out is not so much that it's qualitatively different as a platform. It's simply because that it's a Chinese company, and there are national security concerns, geopolitical concerns that just are not present when it comes to Twitter. But it does suggest perhaps that there are broader questions about data privacy, about the manipulation of the information that we receive, that we should be asking and perhaps should be addressed by more comprehensive regulation of social media. These are some of the questions we're going to discuss at our panel event this evening at UNF.
And this really is would be the first tech regulation of any significance in this country.
Well, we've seen increasing attempts within the last few years to regulate social media and tech companies, and Florida has actually been, along with states like Texas, one of the leaders. So listeners may recall earlier this year that there was a major Supreme Court decision involving attempts by both Florida and Texas to regulate the way that social media companies moderate their platforms. Now, both of those laws are currently on hold and litigation is proceeding, but it does seem that outside of the specific issues related to TikTok, that social media regulation has become a much more prominent part of public policy, particularly here in the state of Florida.
Yeah, states have been trying to chip away at that with the inaction kind of at the federal level. Julie, and Florida has also passed a law that would require social media companies to terminate accounts of kids who are 14 or 15 or require some sort of parental consent.
Yeah. So I think, social media in general are targeting younger generations. It is also showing a lot of research have done on certain social medias are very addictive to young people, especially. So Nick mentioned about the users primarily on TikTok are relatively young. Actually, they are the youngest generation compared to all other social media. There were 1/3 of the young folks on TikToks are using that daily to, watch the news and then conduct all kinds of other activities. And TikTok became famous at the beginning was also because they were the first, well, they are one of the social media platforms create this like challenges for young people to finish. So that's in theory also make the young people more addictive to it too. So that's another concern that why the social media needed to be careful how they manipulate or they mobilize their users the way that how they use the social media.
And it's interesting, we were talking a little bit before the show, Julie, but this is a company that's trying to say there's no risk of this, political influence. And yet, in order to prepare for this court case, they actually enlisted their followers, their users, to reach out to their congressman. And there was this enormous response, hundreds of thousands of, young people, mostly teenagers, calling their congressman to complain about this law.
Yeah, I think I think it's not only TikTok. I think social media in general, having this power to mobilize their users for certain agenda, which is why it brings the concern of the TikTok because it's not U.S. owned technology companies. It's a foreign country. So the concern is fair to be raised by what if another nation is trying to using this platform to mobilize U.S. citizens or other nations. And I think in the world U.S. is not the only country have this concern. In history, India, Indonesia, and all other several foreign countries also have the concern about how TikTok access to their own citizens' individual data and how the potential Chinese government may using that to influence their nations as well. So,
and we should say, social media, the Chinese government doesn't allow foreign social media companies in China, as opposed to them and ByteDance being allowed to operate in the United States. And so that is a little bit of a difference there. So, Nick, in terms of that recent mobilization of people to call their congressman, how do you think that served the company as they're trying to push back on that same narrative?
Well, I don't think it helped them. I think it both served as a wake-up call that got a lot of states, including Florida, to take a much harder look at TikTok and social media among younger Americans. Florida has been, as I said earlier, very active in restricting social media. TikTok is banned in all K through 12 schools here in Florida. It's banned on all state-owned devices. It's even banned on college and university campuses and devices as well. So if I attempt to access TikTok from even my personal phone, if I'm on the UNF campus and on the campus Wi-Fi, I won't be able to access it. If I take my UNF-owned iPad, I take it anywhere, I cannot access TikTok on it because it's restricted. I certainly also think it didn't help them in the debate before Congress when Congress is kind of concerned about this question about how TikTok may be used to manipulate Americans and how that might pose a national security risk if right in the middle of that debate, TikTok gives an active demonstration of its ability to do just that.
What do we know about how some of those restrictions, like you said, security at the federal level, they prohibit their employees from using TikTok on their devices. Also at the state level here on college campuses, do we know any information about how or if that's impacted the use of TikTok?
Well, I think if you asked any of our students here at UNF whether it's restricted their ability to use TikTok, they would tell you that no, it probably hasn't. They can just disconnect from the campus Wi-Fi and they're free to use it any way that they see fit. Now that could change if this bill is successful. And beginning January, initially, the TikTok app is no longer available in the Apple or Google stores, which means that no one would be able to install it if they don't have it already. But then moving forward, it would restrict people's ability to update the app, to get patches, to keep it functional. Now, there are various ways that you can get around that using VPNs or whatever, but then it starts to become, you have to be a little bit more tech savvy at that point. It's not a case of simply turning off your Wi-Fi. If this bill is upheld by the courts, we could see much more significant and effective restrictions than, for instance, the ones we have here in Florida have been able to do.
And this is a First Amendment issue from the perspective of the company. They're saying it's restricting their First Amendment rights, restricting their users' First Amendment rights, Julie. And to be fair, I mean, there are creators, artists that rely very much on this app to spread their message or the work that they do and to earn revenue from it.
Yeah.
So it has a potentially significant impact for them.
Yeah, but I also think that, many people trying to argue that there are other type of social media platforms that having similar functions that, the social media influencer or, a lot of arts or companies can using those functions to attract their followers as well. So I think for like the effect that how to attract the users, that shouldn't be a major issue if TikTok is banned in this country. I'm pretty sure if it's not already happened, there are technology companies here already trying to be competitors of TikTok and try to attract, getting people's attention from TikTok already. But back on the question raised up whether that's banning the TikTok violate the First Amendment of the individuals. I think there is argument down there, which is again, I think TikTok met this challenge as they are not American-owned company. So they also have to follow to another country's law system, which is that country does not have the same constitution as here. So if a country facing or if a company facing two type of laws, how do we how do we know which type of law they are really truly follow?
And does the First Amendment apply to other countries?
Certainly in some countries they don't. So.
Yeah. But it does raise the question, Nick, about, who benefits. To Julie's point, there will be other apps and products that go into that space, that vacuum that would be created. You could see that going straight to Facebook and Meta, to YouTube and Google. I mean, certainly they would stand to benefit mightily if TikTok was banned.
Yeah, I think it kind of cuts in both directions, though. We have seen, at least within the context of the legal case, some of these American-based tech companies weighing in on the side of TikTok. We've seen briefs filed by companies like Meta and Oracle and others saying that this would set a dangerous precedent if this bill were to be allowed to stand. So at least in terms of their immediate bottom line, these companies would be willing and eager, I think, to step in and fill the vacuum that would be left if TikTok were banned in the United States. But thinking more broadly and knowing that both at the federal level and the state level, social media regulation is becoming a much more salient question, I think these US-based companies are fairly concerned with the kind of precedent that could be set if the court were to say, okay, national security, data privacy concerns, these override the First Amendment rights of the companies and their users. That could open up the door to much more social media regulation of US-based companies in the future.
Sure, because I would guess at some point, if it wasn't necessarily national security, I mean, there are a lot of questions about just its mental health impacts, how it's impacting young brains and creating, kind of addictive algorithms that are similar to drug abuse or gambling. And so that's something you're also going to be discussing tonight is just kind of the research that's been done on how addictive and potentially damaging apps like this can be. Is that right?
Yeah. So there is research actually already show that social media in general are influencing our brain. But what is standing out, like the new social media like TikTok, they were using the short video clip that chop the information, like long information, into pieces. So the consumers or the users will enjoy more by watching just a piece of the information instead of the whole information. And the reason they chop the information in short on purpose is trying to make it more addictive to their followers. So you watch like only a couple seconds of a piece of news, and then you wanted to know more or what is the next. So that's what TikTok would stand out other than all other type of social media design in that way. The algorithm in TikTok is very different than the other of the social media as well. So the TikTok now has already updated their function. Initially, they only allow the video clip be couple seconds long. So now they allow for long video clips. But there were also research showing that if people, especially younger people, only consuming short amount of information, in the long term, their brain size can be shrinked. So there's a famous study has already published on neutral science, and the study actually conducted from China. They actually went to a Chinese university and then recruit the participants and do a comparison by a group of people using TikToks and the other group of people just watching the long type of information. And I did find out that people who using the TikTok are having trouble to remember like the whole or the full story of the entire information.
Actually changing the way that their brain absorbs information. It's fascinating. Well, tonight the event at UNF is part of the Diverse Perspective series. It's called TikTok on Trial, The Future of Social Media Regulation. It's from 5 to 6:30 p.m. in the Andrew Robinson Theater. Dr. Nick Seabrook, Julie Shee, thank you so much for coming on and telling us about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, we talk to a local crime author about his dark and innovative new book, Told. The book is titled Find Your Own Way Home, and to call it a dark and compelling read is a definite understatement. I'm joined now by its author, Michael Wiley. He's an award-winning writer and professor of creative writing at the University of North Florida. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Great to be here again.
Great to have you. So I had the distinct pleasure of reading this book over the weekend. It is a really extraordinary read. I thought it was terrific. And I'm not usually reading much crime novels. I mean, that's not kind of my bag. So it is a departure for me to, I think, find a book like this is totally enthralling, beautifully written. Why did you choose to write it in verse?
I have written a lot of novels. I've got a dozen novels at this point, and one of the things that I've always loved as a reader has been the cadence in the best writing. And this doesn't have to be crime fiction alone, but there are certain writers, Daniel Woodrell, James Cain, a number of others, who write with a kind of a rhythmic quality that contributes to suspense, contributes to a sense of drama. And I've always wanted to work on that. My own background as a reader and as a teacher also involves teaching late 18th, early 19th century British literature, which involves a lot of verse, a lot of poetry. And so I thought if I brought those two interest areas, those two deep loves together, what might I be able to do? And so I thought, this might not be a good idea, but I'm going to try writing a whole novel in a kind of a language that really emphasizes those rhythms and those cadences.
I mean, it must have been sort of daunting, but I say the effect is just really extraordinary. It is such a wonderful read. So it's told from 5 different perspectives. None of them are really named, although we do kind of catch the librarian's name at one point in the book. Why did you want to choose them, kind of somewhat anonymous figures, to tell the story through.
Right. This whole story involves a missing teenage girl, who turns out to be a murder victim. And the five narrators are her boyfriend, um, a truck stop or a truck stop preacher, a librarian, a woman who's a long haul truck driver, and a police detective. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to have a number of people who came at her story, at the girl's story, from different angles. I write a lot of my books are in first person narrator. About half my books are first person narrators. And I thought if I brought all these different perspectives together to see the way that they treated this, very interesting and I think, heart compelling story about this missing girl, they would each see different kinds of things, and that would contribute to the mystery, and it would contribute to the interest in the reading.
And they're all kind of deeply flawed characters in some way or another. The book is very dark, and but gripping. The title, "Find Your Own Way Home." I mean, there's a lot of searching in this book. There's a lot of references to people kind of recapturing parts of their past. What did the title mean to you? How did that kind of carry the story through to
Right.
for you?
The original title of this was Whole, just HOLE, and the publisher wanted me to have a title that, I don't know, maybe brought people in a little bit more fully. And Find Your Own Way Home, in some senses, is the flip side of a whole. The whole is the space between the various narrations, the various narratives that the five people tell. The whole is the missing girl. Find Your Own Way Home, gives that little spark of light in the darkness. As you say, it's a fairly dark novel, and I tend to write dark novels. But one of the reasons I love the dark is that when there's a little glimmering of light, just a spark of light, it's amazing what you can see. And so Finding Your Own Way Home in many respects is the narrative arc of this story, is by the very end, in some limited sense, the characters have, at least some of the characters, have found the place that they've been seeking.
And light is kind of a theme in that book. I mean, in addition to the violence, there's, you write about, you have a line where you say that, that we might bend the way the light bends towards the dark without succumbing to it. So, that sliver of hope amid all of this really kind of grim happenings.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. Is I definitely like the idea that there's a space to which we are moving, a place where there is light, and I'm a fairly cheerful guy myself, but I'm very compelled always, as I am on watching television and reading other people's books as well, that I'm always compelled by that darkness and the little bit of light that shines through. Those are the human qualities.
Yeah, and you're going to read us a segment, I believe, from the first section of the book. This is the segment where it's kind of told through the perspective of Allison's boyfriend.
Yes. This is the boyfriend, and the boyfriend goes driving around in a pickup truck around a town named Hollow Rock. It's in Tennessee, very rural, very away from everything. And this is him talking about driving around with Allison. I touched the gas and raced up Seminary Street. Allison sat beside me, window open, the night air howling in, forgetting all I didn't know till then I wanted to forget. Windows up against the coming cold, she said, "Do you ever think of leaving?" I said, "No." The truth was right there in the car with her, was where I thought I'd be if everything worked out, a boy like me who knew how engines worked. I could have told her that I knew every road in Hollow Rock, and that I closed my eyes on High Street, blindly driving all its bends like windings in my dreams. I could have said I was a dustball boy, and dustball boys like dustball towns. I could have told her flying off the Hollow Rock branch railroad tracks 100 miles an hour was far enough and high as I would go. She said, "I think of leaving all the time." And I said, "Don't." She held to me. I held to her. You can't blame kids for dancing that way, holding each other like they'll fall, feet shuffling on wooden floors.
Beautiful. Thank you, Michael. We actually have a call from Christine in San Marco. I think she perhaps has read your work before. Good morning, Christine. Go ahead.
Good morning. So I have read the work before and I've really liked it, but I'm a little unsure about reading something in poetry. So how do you recommend kind of diving in for someone who's new?
No, thanks. That's a good question. I mostly write prose, and this was a departure. I really wanted to try to see how the verse works, but it's something that I always recommend to readers that they read it the same way that they would read any other book, which is to say, read it like prose. Again, it feels to me when I was writing it and when I read it, it feels to me as if this could be something that I was reading just in regular prose fiction. The passage I just read, I'm guessing that not a whole lot of people would be able to hear where the lines break. They do contribute to the reading, but it's a story. It's a story like any other story.
Yeah, and I would say, Christine, I wasn't sure if I would find it a little off-putting when I started reading it this weekend, but it really is very captivating, and it furthers the story. It really doesn't distract you once you're in it. I wanted to ask you, because some of this book is funny in a way that's really dark as the book is, but you have this scene where the grandmother of Allison, who doesn't much care that she's gone or seem concerned about it, has this line where she says, "Life is long and maybe 15 years is quite enough," which is this sort of like stab of brutal reality kind of humor, but there is a lot of humor in this book, it seems to me.
Again, I love dark humor, but some of this is also, it's just we can laugh or we can cry, and usually my tendency is to laugh. I just finished reading a book by Barbara Kingsolver. I was a little late to the game on this one, which is Demon Copperhead.
I was thinking of it when I was reading your book, because I just finished that about 2 weeks ago.
Did you really?
There's a lot
amazing,
of a lot of similarities.
Right? Yeah, it's an amazing book. If people haven't read Demon Copperhead, it won the Pulitzer Prize this past year. I highly recommend it.
But the characters, the life that they live, there's so many similar themes.
You're right. Again, I just came to it myself. But I agree. It's one that I would call a comparative book because this is it tells a story about this kid who's growing up. His name is Demon. It's really Damon, but everybody calls him Demon. And he lives a really tough, and an unbelievably tough life. And it's a funny book. It's a really funny book. And if you don't find yourself laughing along the way with him, you're not laughing at him, but laughing with him. I think that's the key, is if you can laugh with the characters, whatever their lifestyle is, you're in a good space.
And I just want to very briefly touch on, because we're almost out of time, but you used a pen name for this book. You've written so many books before and are well known in the world of crime writing, mystery writing, detective novels. Why did you use a pen name?
Right. For this title, this is under Michael George. And I did it for really the reason of not confusing readers. Most of what I write is very much commercial fiction, for, I hope, a large audience. And this is one that I didn't want some of those readers getting into this without knowing what they were getting into. I think that anybody who does commit to it or does give it a try, will find it very similar to the other work that I do in that it gets into characters, it gets into plots, it gets into places. But I know that writing it in verse is in and of itself a kind of impediment. And if you can get over that, then great. So it's Michael George instead of Michael Wiley.
It's called Find Your Own Way Home. Can people find this around town, or is it just online?
It's both. Bookstores, I'm not sure what all bookstores have it. Again, this comes from a university press. And so they don't have the kind of distribution that others do. I know that San Marco Books has it, but definitely if you look up Michael George, Find Your Own Way Home on any of the online sellers, it's there too.
And you will be doing an author talk at the Carpenter Library at UNF on October 15th at 5 p.m. We'll have a link to that on our website. Michael Wiley, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Teach is a day-long conference created to engage, empower, and inspire teachers.
I have been so inspired by all the teachers and future teachers that we have at this conference, the Teach Conference in Jacksonville, and it has been a positive day that has just really re-inspired me and got me really excited to go back into the classroom.
Early bird tickets are available for $40. For tickets and more info, go to wjct.org/teach.
On the next Fresh Air, Demi Moore. She stars in the new horror film The Substance as an aging actress who uses a black market drug to create a younger, better version of herself, at least temporarily. Moore says she took the role because she was fascinated with the internal horrors many women in midlife silently deal with in their quest to remain youthful. Join us
Today at noon on WJCT News 89.9.
American families are having fewer children these days, but for families where that's not the case, the main reason? Meaning.
A fixed belief in the goodness of children, and the goodness of children in an intrinsic sense, that each child is worth having, maybe an old-fashioned biblical belief that children are a blessing.
Falling birth rates and missing meaning in parenting, that's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
Every election cycle, Americans nationwide consider ballot measures. And every time, the proponents and opponents of those measures work hard to sway voters their way. This year, some are changing the wording on ballots to frame questions in their favor. What other strategies are being deployed? We get an overview of this year's ballot measures next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
And we're back. Well, it was not the outcome the Jags hoped for. Now 0-2 after facing the Cleveland Browns at home. To bring us up to speed on exactly what went wrong is News4Jax sportscaster Alessandra Pontbriand. Good morning, Alessandra.
Good morning. I like how we said in the commercial break, we said, sad Jags.
Sad Jags.
Sad Jags.
Yeah.
Frustrated Jags.
Yeah. Well, what's going on here? What's not happening that needs to be happening?
Winning a game. That's the first
Okay.
thing. Yeah, no, this is really upsetting. I think everyone was shocked. I know the four of us in the News4Jax sports team, we all were like, oh, the Jaguars are going to win this. Like, how do you not beat Deshaun Watson and the Browns, especially after their week 1 performance? And they didn't. It was really disappointing. You know, after the game, you could see the frustration and disappointment, not only through Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence's press conferences, but that locker room was really depressing. You know, Trevor Lawrence said it best. He said that they suck. He was like, we suck right now, and it's shocking. And, you know, he said that the offseason training camp, they did so well. And, you know, they expected to have a good season. There were so many, you know, highs going into this season, and then now they're 0-2. So it's like, you know, what's wrong? I asked Christian Kirk and I asked Mitch Morse, you know, what the issues were, and they were like communication. You know, Mitch Morse said communication and then execution, and Christian Kirk said, you know, communication's an issue, which that's a glaring issue if, you know, this offense has been together for 3 years and there's really not that many new additions except, you know, yes, Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr., but on the offensive line, it's only Mitch Moore. So, you know,
they should have it down,
they
right?
Of course. You know, if you've been in a offense for 3 years, you guys should know exactly what you're doing. You shouldn't need that much communication. You should just know. So, you know, I think this week during the press conferences, I'm going to ask, you know, Press Taylor, the offensive coordinator, Doug Peterson, just to elaborate on that. You know, what is the issue with your communication? Are you guys just not communicating at all? You know, it's a team sport. You have to talk. Or, you know, is the play getting to them late and he can't, you know, say the play quick enough? You know, there's so many, who knows? And that's just speculation, of course, for me. But, you know, it's glaring to hear that communication is an issue.
He was sacked 4 times in the game. And the last one, that very consequential safety that kind of decided the game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, who knows what the play was? I know some people were saying, why would you call that play? We didn't even see the play. You didn't even have time to see the play, you know, because he was already sacked. So it's like, you don't know. You know, there were 2 offensive linemen that were beat by 1 defensive lineman. And that's not okay. You know, you can't do that. How do you 2 people on 1 guy? You should be, and that was the guy that sacked Trevor Lawrence too. You know, so it's I don't even know. You know, where do you go from here?
The defense still doing all right though. I mean,
great.
Yeah.
You know, listen, Jamal was saying this last night on the Sunday Sports Zone, which you can watch Sunday nights on News for Jacks at 10:30 p.m. Humble little input there.
Mhm.
But he was saying, he was like, the league average last year was, league average for scoring last year was 21.8. The Jaguars defense held Miami to 20. That's the best offense in the league last year. And then you just held the Browns to 18. So you're getting them under the league average. The offense just needs to score at least 20 points or more just to get to the league average to win the games, and they weren't able to do that. So it's a little disappointing when the defense is doing their job and then the offense is just not reciprocating. I was filming the game yesterday and they were right in the red zone. They weren't able to score. How do you not score when you're only 2 yards away from the goal line?
There was an interesting take. My husband was actually reading some of it to me in The Athletic, talking about how Trevor Lawrence, if you look at his performance stats, hasn't done well throwing into a close, a kind of a tight, I guess, hole or whatever. That, his completed passes and the work that he has done successfully hasn't really been this great under pressure playing.
Yeah, he definitely needs to play better. Miami, he did have some good passes that were in tight windows. The one to Brian Thomas Jr. when he scored the touchdown, that was a good one. But yesterday, the offense just looked horrible. The only good play, Travis Etienne had a good running play. Brian Thomas Jr. 66-yard reception, that was a good play. And Brenton Strange had a 1 or 2 good throws at the end. But Trevor Lawrence needs to play better. I think Trevor Bank Stadium, you read the room, that was not, you shouldn't have done that. Myles Garrett even said it after the game that they heard that it was going to be named Trevor Bank Stadium. They were like, now we really want to beat him because he has the stadium named after him.
Makes him like a fatter target. Yeah.
Absolutely. It was tone deaf and they shouldn't have done it. They should have waited until, and I get, marketing promotions, you do it before the season, but read the room. The Miami loss was not good. Jaguars fans are not happy. Now they're really not happy. And now that the Browns heard it was Trevor Bank Stadium and wanted to beat you. It's a little tone deaf. So, next week, Monday Night Football at the Bills for Monday Night Football at the Bills. So hopefully they can turn around. That is a hard place to play, though, especially nighttime, prime time.
Well, Alessandra, we will be hoping to talk to you after that game as well. Thank you so much for being here. It's always great to catch up with you on Mondays.
Yeah, hopefully we can talk about positive vibes next
a win,
week.
Right? Not the sad Jags. Well, that's our
by Baptist Health.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. Quilt Fest Jacksonville, themed Sew Your Heart Out in its 37th year, showcases 400 quilts artfully sewn to be visually stunning and beyond tradition. September 19th through 21st at the Prime Osborne Center. Tickets at quiltfestjacks.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, answering who, what, when, where, why, and how is critical to proving the truth. More at terrellhogan.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR.